those of you who are joining for the first time today, Third Path Institute is a national nonprofit celebrating over 2 decades of showing people how to do work, family, and leadership differently, and why applying the science of work-life integration helps everyone work smarter. Did you know that over 100,000 people checked out our free resources last year, like the live and recorded versions of our Thursday webinars? We're glad you're here today, and as you will quickly discover, it's a celebration of everything that we've learned. And as usual, I'm super excited about both of our guests today. First, you're going to meet Marlon Gutierrez, and then a little bit later, you're going to meet an amazing marriage and family counselor, Saliha Baba. And Marlon is a great person to start off this webinar because what we're talking about today is how to help couples get on the same page. And when you hear Marlon's story, you're going to hear that Marlon and Stephanie have done a great job of thinking outside the box, even before they had their first child. And now he's the proud papa of a second child, too. So Marlon, welcome. Do you have a couple words you want to share before I tell a couple more things before we tell your long story?
Hi, Jessica. Thanks so much for having me here. Always great. I think the work that the team at Third Path is doing is just going such a long way for our community as parents. I'm the proud dad of 2 kids. I'm a growth marketer, and I've been working remote for almost 6 years now. So it's been a while. But yeah, currently living in Orlando and enjoying it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, when you hear Marlon's longer story, you'll see that he really represents so many of the things that Third Path is trying to teach 2-parent households, whether that's 2 moms, 2 dads, mom and dad, or even parents who are divorced but still sharing in the care of their kids. There really are some creative ways we can think about how to do work and family differently and how couples can get on the same page. One of the things we're doing this year is offering free resources. So if you went to our website, you'd be able to download this handout. That is the handout we're kind of organizing today's call on about getting on the same page. And on it, you'll see that there's a number of different factors that can influence how easy or hard it is for people to get on the same page. Some is more on the home front, like the ones I've got up on this slide. Some are more about your work situation. But either way, you can download this slide, download this handout from our website, and get started with some of these ideas as soon as the website's done. As soon as today's webinar is done. So you'll be hearing a little bit about how Marlon has thought differently about how he redesigned family and money, and how he did this by thinking differently about how he could approach his work, but not just him, how he and Stephanie were able to think differently about all these issues. Because unfortunately, and this is one of the bigger issues we're going to be talking about today, when we don't think outside the box, couples can get really stuck. Sometimes it's moms and moms who get stuck, or dad and dad who get stuck, or mom and dad who get stuck. Families of all different shapes and sizes can get stuck in this way, because what happens is the workplace often rewards people who put work first. And so sometimes couples will consciously or unconsciously protect one person's career. And that means the other parent becomes the primary flexor. And that can make couples feel frustrated. And so what you'll hear in Marlon's story is that Stephanie and Marlon, were much more intentional around thinking differently around including both of them in the care of their children and thinking outside the box around how to make this affordable to do so too. So Marlon, if I was going to summarize your story into 3 chapters, there's kind of the before your daughter was born. Then I interviewed you at a certain point in time and you were balancing work and family with just 1 child. And then we're going to eventually get to the story of how you're doing today. But tell us, way back when you were just balancing work and life without a daughter, what were some of the things that you and Stephanie learned about and changes you made even before you became parents?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Stephanie and I, we both started our careers right after college in a very big corporate environment. And we were both people that were very young and eager to climb that so-called corporate ladder. And in that environment, we had, what occurs in a lot of companies where they expect employees to just give their all. And you have that dangled, that carrot that's dangled in front of you for you to always perform and do more for the company. I think early on we learned that doing so will come at the expense of the way that we want to live our life. And when we got together, we were these people that were very hungry about growing in our careers. And after some severe work stress, it caused some serious health ailments for us. And that was really what we needed for us to realize how much stress can really start impacting the life that you want to live. And it allowed us to take inventory of what we were doing with our lives.
Yes. And so even before having kids, if I'm remembering correctly, you were noticing all this and you made some changes. I think partly by chance, you started working remotely. And did you see some improvements when you made that change?
Yeah, so once we started realizing a lot of this, we decided we were going to prioritize ourselves in our life and we were going to be healthy and that we were going to seek a better balance of work life at that point in time. So we decided to do something crazy, to leave the city that we knew, and we were going to move into a more calm area where the cost of living was going to be significantly lower. And we had a home at the time. We were going to use the equity money from that home to be able to live more simple elsewhere and get an investment property so that we'd be able to be okay. At first, the intention was for us to quit our jobs. My wife was able to. And when I tried to quit, my company at the time wanted to keep me on. So they offered me the opportunity to work remote, which I did take. And that was my first foray into the remote space. But when I was there, things were better. But being the only remote person in a company that relies on people being in the office, it didn't really make me feel like it was an environment that was conducive to me. There was always something that made me feel like I needed to give more because it felt like a favor that they were allowing me to work remote. So
Yeah.
things started improving, but it still wasn't the ideal.
Yeah, yeah. And if I remember correctly, and I this is a while ago, we were talking about these things, so I might get them wrong, but it's that Stephanie switched what she was working on. So you guys were both working, but working differently. Is that a good memory of that you were both kind of just changing how you were approaching work, changing the kind of work you were doing to make a more balanced approach to life? Does that sound right?
Definitely, yeah. We were completely open to what we needed to do to change our career so we'd be better, feeling better about where we were. So my wife quit her job in Miami, and then when we got here, we always had an interest in real estate. So my wife ended up pursuing her real estate license. Then she started getting into property management, and later, with more work-life flexibility that we had, it allowed her to also grow as a real estate agent and also start her own company, which is where we're at now. So yeah, her career was able to grow, but just in a different space, one that she didn't think
Yep.
she'd be in.
Yes, yes. So again, just so many lessons to learn that are probably we'll come back to as we continue through the webinar. Some real risks. You took some risks. You decided, hey, life is short. We want our health. We want to live a better life. Let's go find a simpler, more affordable way to live. And then it looks like what we're going to hear as the story continues is that this has been really working well for both you and your wife. There's an interesting moment you told me about when you were about to have your first baby, and you wanted to take paternity leave, and you were hearing that they were only going to give you 2 weeks paternity leave, but they were willing to offer you more money. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, you and Stephanie were talking about that moment in time and helping each other think about what should you do? Should you go for more money? Should you go for more time for life? Does that ring a bell? And what happened at that moment in time?
I had been there already for a while. I was a very big contributor to the team, and they only offered me 2 weeks, and I wanted 6 simply because it was the industry average, and I had done my research, and I felt like that was something that I deserved. and they declined it. They instead offered me an increase in salary, which was very significant. But I knew that that only came with more responsibility and the expectation of giving more time to them, which made me feel like it was regressing back to the start of the reason as to why we left and why we did the things that we needed to. So after about a few days of my wife and I just discussing, we decided that the best thing to do was actually leaving that company and rolling up my sleeves to apply to a fully remote environment, which was also a risk that I took at the time, but I also didn't want to deal with already having asked for the paternity leave, not having it granted, and then having to just do that and not get the 6 weeks that I needed. So I ended up working for another remote company. This one was the first time I was in a role that was fully remote, very flexible. And even though I was a new employee, we're completely on board for me taking the paternity leave that I needed to be with my daughter.
Yeah, yeah. So there again, so many important messages. Would it be fair to say that by having Stephanie share this vision with you of you being involved and having a, being an involved dad and having a healthy life just like her, where, balance was part of the equation for both of you, having her have that vision and wanting that for you gave you some courage at that moment? Is that a fair statement to say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely a team effort, and there are many moments where I felt more comfortable staying without that risk of like, okay, I'm just going to stick with this because this is easier. And having that shared vision, Stephanie was a reminder to me, and every time we talked, that we wanted more than just that. So yeah, even to this day, when I find myself in moments where I want more of that balance, more of that time with my kids, my wife is a big reason as to why I have the courage to do a lot of the decisions that I do.
Okay, folks listening in today, whether you're listening in live or the recorded version, hold on to that statement. That is what we're trying to get at today. There is an incredible opportunity when you help couples think together about their goals. They really become a resource to each other when the next curveball comes their way and they're trying to figure out what's the best answer. And it just gets to become a richer and deeper resource to each other. It's quite lovely to see. So this is a really important point we're trying to make today. But there's more. Again, Marlon's story hits just so many important points. Not only did they take some risks to move away from jobs that were less aligned with their goals and make some important decisions to find a more affordable lifestyle so they could hold on to their goals. What you're about to hear is that the risks that they took helped Marlon get to a place where now remote work was normal. And what he started to see was, wow, this is a place where we actually can be really smart about how we approach our work. So you've got this wonderful new baby, you're working in a workplace that's more used to remote work. And what I'm seeing when I listen to you tell this part of your story is that not only were they good about remote work, they were good at understanding, hey, there's a certain amount we can accomplish in a set amount of time. We need to meet those objectives. We need to set reasonable objectives that we can meet, but we can achieve them in a flexible way. Tell me more about what it was like to work in an organization that was really supporting you to work this way, which, by the way, happens to be very helpful when you go through a pandemic. Tell us a little bit about this moment in time, Marlon.
Definitely, yeah. That was a pretty big life-changing moment on the way that I approached work, because I always had this mindset of you have to show face, quote unquote. You had to be available whenever your boss was online and that sort of thing. And in this environment, the main objectives here were based on critical goals that we needed to reach. And it didn't matter the amount of hours that we were putting in order to reach it. If you found out a way to efficiently get to those figures, then you were going to be okay. Nobody was going to be questioning you on whether you worked 20 hours this week or 40 hours or if you did 60. So it allowed for a lot of flexibility at that point and a lot of process management tools that I started to see could also work for the home. So we started using a lot of these agile methods and project management tools like Trello to start balancing what chores needed to be done around the house. So taking a page from what I was doing at work, and then we were incorporating some of these same learnings on getting stuff done and prioritizing and efficiency, so that then we would have a more balance in the stuff that needed to be done at home.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know. It's really it just becomes a positive cycle where things just get better and better. We create this joint partnership at home so we can kind of meet the next curveball. We learn some skills at work that help us become more effective at home. The fact that we have a teamwork at home helps us balance things better at work for the unusual things that happen on both sides of the equation. It just becomes a continuously better situation. Um, and here you are today. You've already learned a lot of skills that have helped you be ready for a crazy pandemic. But by the way, you didn't just handle a crazy pandemic over the last umpteen months. You also became a proud father of a second child, which can sometimes be a little exhausting, by the way. I could tell you a story about when we went from 1 to 2 children. How has it been to go to a second child? What do you see now that's working well? What maybe was a little moment that was challenging? How's it going for you today?
Yeah, so right now things are very well, but in that process of the pregnancy, my wife also had a high risk pregnancy, and at this point she had built up the business, also managing it remotely, and it was doing very well. But we found ourselves in a position again where we needed to figure out exactly what we needed to do for us to feel like we were okay again. And a lot of it was with the fears of possibly losing our baby and having to go through all of that. So, that pregnancy stage was really hard. I needed to spend more time at home, taking care of the needs of my daughter. So my wife, she was at bed rest, and being able to get the care that she needed. We went through a very difficult stage with my wife's career at that point in time, but through what we've learned on setting up proper structures and using different programs like Trello to manage different people and different teams, we were able to fare well after that stage. And when our baby was born, it was great. I mean, the pandemic was a sure strain on everything. We were scared of going to the hospital. We actually had the delivery at home, which was a very unique experience. But it was almost like, having him here already set the things in motion for just more positive thinking and getting ourselves in a more positive environment. And having the flexibility from my job was, a sure way for me to have been able to be as present with my son as I was with my daughter, which was great. Plus the additional things that I had learned. So I feel now, 6 months after he's been born, we're at a really great place. Both of our careers are still going, even though, it was a very difficult year for so many different people. So right now we're just very thankful, and definitely this structure, this partnership that we have, it's made things work. And in moments where we feel like it might not, we feel confident enough that together we can come up with another creative solution.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you're going to be hearing me talk about is that we have a pretty amazing resource around helping couples think about this stuff. In fact, I think I put it up, but it's worth putting up one more time, where right now for the month of December, people can download this thing we're called the Third Path Leader, Reimagining Work, Love, and Leadership. And why I have the word love underscored there is because what you're hearing in Marlon and Stephanie's story, and certainly it's a story I would say about my own life, is that when you get couples, again, whether it's two moms, two dads, mom and dad, it doesn't matter, thinking differently about how they can do work in a way where they have time and energy for their lives and their relationship to each other, you really do start down a path where you create this openness and creativity and curiosity to keep on thinking smart about how to make your life work better. And it turns out this is a great way to get through the pandemic, too. We're going to wrap up with a couple quick comments about some big picture thinking, and then we're going to get to Sally Ha in a second. Um, so one of the things that we've talked about on previous webinars this year is because what we're trying to do is help people think about how do you get through a pandemic when you've got work, life, and maybe school responsibilities that you didn't normally have. And the one core piece is this concept of boundary setting. It's the idea, it's not, rigid, but it's not too loose of a boundary. It's firm and flexible, meaning you get smart about saying, hey, if I really want time for work and life and time to recharge, I've got to kind of say, what can I do and what can I not do so that I have time and energy for all these different things. Does this sound familiar to you, Marlon? And then I'm going to put up one other picture for us to talk about too.
Yeah, it definitely does. I feel like we definitely have to prioritize what we need to get done, especially now with all the rules that have come through with the pandemic and schooling and all that. A lot of things, it's okay for it to fall off. And we're also starting incorporating what we call like our marriage meetings, and it's every Thursday. We just, like a business, kind of in partnership, go through an agenda. What are the things that need to get done, and then we assign these tasks to each other so that it keeps us aware of what needs to happen. And during those conversations, we prioritize and say, okay, this needs to be done. This can wait until another point in time. And it allows us to really look at our schedules as well and say, okay, this is what we're going to be doing at this time. This is schooling. This is that. So it's allowed us to really organize.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'll tell you a funny story. So Jeff and I would do that, but we'd do it over a great dinner and a glass of wine on Friday nights because my mother-in-law used to take our kids on Friday nights until Saturday morning. And so we'd go out on our Friday night date and spend the night talking about the kids and talking about our jobs and talking. And so you can even combine a glass of wine with these conversations to have some fun. So wonderful. Yeah. Good for you guys. So the bottom line is what you're hearing in Marlon's story is that they're in it together. They created a team approach at home. They've thought about the unique needs of their family, and those needs change, obviously, as kids get older and you add another child to the mix. They've created a schedule that works for both his work and her work. And then they check in regularly. I didn't even know that they had come up with this Thursday meeting to just kind of keep on thinking about how's it going. And as you heard over and over again in his story, that you do this because you're not just getting through the week on a gerbil wheel where you do work and then you do family and then on the weekends you do errands and then you do work and then you do family and then weekends on the errands. You've built in some time to actually enjoy either your time where you're playing with your kids or time as a couple or time as a family. Have you learned any tricks around recharge time during the pandemic? I know it's especially hard in the pandemic, but have you learned any tricks around recharge time?
So something that we've just kind of been doing, and it just happened naturally because we felt like we needed to get some sun and vitamin K. We've been starting our mornings together outside in our porch with some coffee. It gives my wife and I some time to check our emails in the morning over some coffee, and then the kids, this is after breakfast, so right after they have breakfast, they have some snacks and we start talking about how our day is going to look like, and we involve our daughter now because she's old enough, and then our baby's getting some light sun. So that has been a great way to start the day because it feels just like an easy way to start everything that needs to happen, and you start already recharged. So that has been working out well for us. Wonderful.
Literally charging from the sun. That's really great. I'm going to skip over this slide, but it's just to remind everybody that, he's been learning integration skills both at work and at home. And Marlon, you're going to keep on using these across the life cycle. So wonderful. We've now seen a positive example of how people can think differently around arranging work and family in a way where you feel like you have time to do both well and time to breathe. And we're going to talk a little bit about why Marlon and Stephanie were successful, because they were really using some skills that Saliha Baba is going to talk about in a second. And these are skills that all couples can learn. So we're going to talk about those skills in a second. But what we're also going to talk about when Saliha joins us is what happens when couples get stuck and how do you help them get unstuck. So Saliha, I am so glad you're here. If anybody's listening in and is excited about learning a new way of thinking about how to think in a creative way in relationship with somebody, in this case with parenting, get a copy of this relational parenting book. It's a beautifully illustrated book that helps illustrate the ideas that we're going to be talking about today. It was very mind-boggling, blowing for me when I read this book. It was very helpful in explaining what I've seen with so many couples. Saliha, I'm so glad you're here. Any thoughts you want to share after listening to Marlon's story and before we get to talking about those skills couples can learn?
Well, firstly, Jessica, thank you for inviting me and thank you for the vision that you carry through Third Path. I think it's really change making and what we need to have healthy lives, to have fun lives, to have lives that are fulfilling. Often we think we can tag on to things, but this idea of how do you integrate and not silo your lives is really critical. So thank you for inviting me to be part of that rich conversation. And I feel like we can continue just listening to Marlo and how he's doing it. You know, I just want to bring in the highlighter, Marlo, and just keep like you know how, as you were talking about documenting and all of that and using Trello, that just do commentary on the side. That's how I felt.
Yes.
As I was listening.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's a really good illustrative story of what's possible between couples. And again, I'm giving you guys just a really short excerpt from that wonderful book I was telling you guys, the relational book for parenting. I'm only using a couple of visuals from that book, but it's a really great book that helped me think about, well, what is Marlon and Stephanie doing that's working so well? What was it that Jeff and I were doing that allowed us to think in a more curious way? So one of the things out of that book is this concept that there's these skills we can learn and get better at to stay in relationship and have more success in coming up with creative and joyful answers to what we need in a relationship. Tell us a little bit about these different skills, and if you heard any of them in Marlon's story.
So, Jessica, I would like to step back into that space called the relational space, which is the center of this wheel. And then jump into the skills, because I think in Marlon's story we hear that through the process of life and living and the challenges, they were creating what we all create, which is the space between, in this specific case, space between couples. And specifically to Marlon's story, the space between the four people that make up the family, right? So it's not just couples. And even though this is a parenting book, I often work with couples on creating and talking and thinking about what that means. What is the relational space? So we often live in a world which is very individualizing, which is we are bounded by our bodies and we think me and myself starts and stops here, right? And we flip that in this book, in the tradition that I come from. I'm a couples and family therapist. And we believe it's in relationships that we are born. And it's out of relationships we are born and into relationships. So relationships is what's central. And so relational space is, just imagine a ball between the two of you. And the two can be anybody. It can be at work. It can be a leader or a manager or follower. It can be between husband and wife, two wives, and your parent and child. That space, I think about it as what beautifully you guys call it, the third path, you know. It's imagining a third space, because you're so bounded in our bodies. We think about Jessica is there and I'm here and that's it. But there's this third space. I prefer to think about space than the thing that's being born. And that's the relational space. And how we engage, what we add to it. Imagine it as a plant, right? We're growing that space or we're killing it, right? And so when you start with that, we start hearing, and sorry, Marlon, I'm talking about you as a third person, so jump in here.
No worries.
Because there is this relationship between the three of us in that way, is that there was a lot of challenges that came up, right, in terms of the pregnancy, but before that in terms of the maternity leave. And they stayed what I call playful, which is they did the trial and error of asking the job to give him more leave, right? Stuff like that continues to inform how that space that you're highlighting expands and contracts. So it's a very organic space. They also were what I heard as re-examining their priorities, right? They said, we want a simple life. We left the city, letting things go. These are coming from places, when we talk about values, these are stories, these are ideas of what we think we should be doing. And it was very prominent, Marlon, when you said, oh, we went to college and then we went to corporate and we started to climb the ladder. That's the story we are given, that's how life should be. You're supposed to go to college, then you meet up somebody, then you get married, then you have children. Meanwhile, you're doing the job. But people do it in lots of different ways. And that's what I hear in your story, that you started to play with what was critical for you, and you started to ask questions of each other. And in that moment, there was a lot of uncertainty. I mean, you talked about it took courage. And you said a beautiful statement. Marlon said, I was able to be courageous because of I'm really going to hack what you said here. But it is this idea of that you leaned on your wife in some ways, and she leaned on you in other ways. And that's that relational space that you both held the uncertainty together. And we can do it with not just our partners, but because today we are talking about couples, I'm limiting it, but we do it with everybody. Our coupleship is supported by our extended families and friends. So I don't want to forget that relational space is bigger than just the space between the two of us. So I'll pause there and we can get more specific, Jessica.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to show you a picture that describes what Saliha is talking about. There's that circle between the couple. And actually listening to you today, I'm better understanding even more from this profound way of looking at things. So thank you for that. But what Saliha is getting at is that if the back and forth between Marlon and Stephanie was helping expand this space to be, more inclusive of possibility, because they were asking questions, considering the context. Do we really want to just climb the corporate ladder? Maybe we want to think in new ways about this. What do you think about that, honey? Is this what you want? I don't know. And so there was a lot of back and forth and expansion of how they could think about things together because of that space between them. And so we're going to come back to this concept that there's some skills that couples can learn, and Marlon and Stephanie were using. But what I wanted to make sure we get to, and it's just going to be one of those times when we have such short amount of time, so I'll just have to keep on marching us along. Let's see, here we go. So what happens when there's a disagreement, an argument? And in particular, Saliha and I are going to be talking a little bit about sometimes there can be arguments that keep on repeating themselves. It seems like we call them tangos at Third Path, where you just take one step into a discussion that sets off the same argument, the same tango, and you get stuck every single time. How do you step out of this? But before we go there, this is what Saliha was talking about, is that space between couples. I love your point that it's bigger than couples. You can think about the whole family system. You can think about our whole friendship network. There's a lot of people that are influencing this space. But when couples understand that there is this third thing between the two of them, that it can include excitement and affection, curiosity, they can, when someone says something that's, not their opinion, they can listen and say, wow, I hear you. And instead of saying you're attacking me, it's like, we're looking at it from this lens where it's this thing between us. I'm hearing from you, you're hearing from me. Together we're creating something new in our way of thinking about this. I'm sure I'm doing disservice to some of what you're saying. So what would you add to that before I put up the next picture?
I think what we do is sometimes in these argument spaces, even in my own personal life, when you imagine the relational space, it's saying, so how is this growing? How is this affecting us? So it
Mm-hmm.
can, and as a couples therapist, I often ask this question when couples come in and they say, oh, we're just arguing all the time. I say, and who's taking care of the relationship? And they both look at me like, what are you saying? Because
Mm-hmm.
by the time they come to me, that circle, that sphere that you're showing is no longer where our attention is. And because
Yeah.
it's not tangible and we live in a very material world, it's really hard to kind of hold on to the us.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
this whatever you can do, find a way to hold on to the image. This is one way we were offering an image, right?
Yes.
Give
Yes.
it some body to the us. When things are
Yes.
going well, we feel it. The us,
Yes.
we feel good. But when things are not going well, what we feel is more within the person, which is we feel a vacuum, a disconnection. So the us dissipates very quickly and becomes in me. I
Yes.
feel something is lacking here. So we
Yes.
know it's lacking in the here, but we're holding it in our bodies rather than in the space in between. So that's what I would say. Find an image to hold the relationship as a third entity, as a space between, and ask the question, hey, how is this affecting the us? How is it affecting our relationship?
Yes. That is, how is it affecting us? That is wonderful. And what's, again, we're kind of cutting to the chase on some very big concepts, but one of the reasons why sometimes arguments can feel very stuck and we can lose track of the us is because of some old stories that weren't even to do necessarily with that particular couple, or maybe old stories that were to do with that couple but a long time ago, or some new information that's kind of getting us sidetracked. Gee, I'm supposed to advance in my career, and the only way to do that is to give up on paternity leave and make more money.
Right.
So couples are kind of being given information and have old stories about what are men supposed to do and fathers supposed to do and moms supposed to do, and all of that can kind of really get us stuck.
Yeah.
I thought this concept of old stories influencing that relational space was very powerful. Can you tell, did I do it justice? What would you add?
I think so. I may be jumping ahead here, Jessica, so let me know. But when you think about getting stuck, like when you said, okay, can you talk about it? I was like, so how would I, imagining all the couples I've seen, by the way, I've been working for about over 25 years with couples and individuals, and kind of trying to distill that as a challenge, right? But I was
Yes.
like, what would I say in those? And I said, what are the two phrases? And it came back to stories and connection.
Mm-hmm.
And stories are the worldviews, how we come in. It starts from everything to how we just had Thanksgiving. Those of you who are cooking turkey, everything from how do you cook turkey and when should the dinner be ready and how should the table be set and who should be at the table. Everything from that small to as big as what we were hearing Marlon say, which is how do you do work life? How much should you make to feel like you have enough, right? All of those stories are both cultural, social, and our families, our own parents, our own friends, our media, are conveyor belts of those stories. They bring it to us in our life. So when we are lost, we look over and we pick a story from someone else's storyline. And that's what I mean by old stories. And it can be your trauma, it can be your histories of what you experience, it can be cultural stories of what men and women should do if they're in a heterosexual relationship. It can be what our expectations are of what a child should do in relationship to whatever developmental stage, right? And how they should be performing. And the tension right now with the pandemic, the tension of education, if my child doesn't get proper education, then that conveyor belt of going into corporate America is going to be hurt, right? So that tension is a story too.
Yep. Yes. Yes. And so, again, why I found it so profound for you to help us think about the us as this third thing, to literally, that's what was happening with Marlon and Stephanie. They were solving it from the us. And I'm going to give a really concrete example I've talked about before on a Thursday webinar where when our second child was born, Jeff and I had a plan of how we did things with our first child, and I had the assumption that we would repeat that same plan when the second child was born, but I was probably more aware of it. I was carrying around the baby for 9 months and, really mentally kind of thinking about how life was going to shift. And long story short, along came the baby, and Jeff hadn't really thought about, we had 6 years apart between our two kids, so our daughter was already in preschool, and, he forgot about the new baby stage. And, there was this moment where there was just so much, that circle was full of that strife, like that picture, where there was, I was at lots of frustration. And because, and again, what was happening was, I had some assumptions about what we were going to do, and, hadn't really talked to each other about it. And honestly, what I had to do first was share some of my frustration with somebody else so that when I could talk to Jeff, we could get to that place of curiosity, context, all those other skills that you talked about, and look for the us in the solution again, and get back on track. So that concept of there's this thing between us, and how do we solve it for the us? That's really what I'm getting at. And I love that your pictures describe it so well. What would you add before we get to some typical work-family challenges that surface around this? Anything you could add?
I think what we heard, Marlon, what you were speaking is moving from those old stories to developing the new stories. And that's what I think Third Path is trying to do. You're doing it at the at the visionary level, at the global level, right? Between leaders, work, and family life, which is we need to reimagine. And here's the thing. When I say stories, people are thinking, oh, me and you, there are facts, there are lives here. Yes, there are lives. But when you talked about expectations, when you talked about Jeff had forgotten what it was to have a new baby, how we code them and how we carry them, that's what I'm talking about, stories. So they have an element of interpretation, but they also have an element of imagination. It's like it's never fully coded in the full way. It's partial threads we've all taken, and we make that up as stories. Like, wow, wasn't that a beautiful time? And somebody else is remembering the college days and saying, heck no, it was not beautiful. I remember times staying up all night. I had no sleep. And that's just two different stories, but they can coexist. Stories can be in contradiction and can talk about the same experience and feel very different, because that's what it is. So this notion that I think Marlon and Stephanie were playing with, at least the way I was hearing, Marlon, you can correct me, is that they were they were not just birthing babies. They were birthing new stories of how to be together and have a family.
Yes. And Marlon, I'm going to get you to say your thoughts about what you're hearing us talk about, and add your own 2 cents in 1 second. But I want to give one more kudo, which is, if you look at this image about this concept of this us between the two people, if you think about that moment in time when Marlon was being told, hey, you can get a lot more money, but just not a bigger paternity leave. And Stephanie was saying, well, I think we want to have life with time, not just money. Together, that mix, those arrows, that dynamism between the two of thinking about it together, help them get to a better answer. It's that back and forth that can create that wonderful new answer. Marlon, you've heard us talk about this. Does any of this ring any bells for you? Thinking about the way that you and Stephanie have been able to kind of navigate these many changes is because the two of you are good at creating a storyline that works for both of you, and thinking and listening to each other with curiosity as you look for that us. How does that sound, Marlon?
Yeah, well, this has been great, and Saleha, I mean, the way that you were able to describe this through this relational space and the concept of old stories and new stories just very much clicks with me. I feel like every day that's something we still have those old stories that are there, and they challenge us, and they come up all the time, and that's something that we are very much aware of, and Stephanie and I are constantly talking about that. And we have a lot of people that always tell us, you do things in a very different way. And I'm sure that's the same as, them equating that to the news stories that you're talking about here. So it's been very, very interesting to hear.
Yeah. Good. So Saliha, there's lots more we could say. I think if we have time, I wanted to talk about some of the typical things we've heard. We've been around for 20 years, and it's amazing how much, in some ways, the world has changed and hasn't changed in 20 years. And so I put up some, a handful of some of the kind of places where couples get stuck. And I wanted to talk about some of them and see if any of them were ones that you've heard about and how you've helped couples think outside the box around it. Obviously, listening to Marlon's story, one of the ones you might have heard and some couples talk about, and it's not just men who think this. Sometimes it's women who think this, that real men don't do family. Well, clearly, Marlon shows us that isn't the case. Has that been something you've seen in couples sometimes? And is it just men who think this, or just women, or have you ever seen this issue?
Yeah, I think we all are carriers of it, that. And it's not. Again, I'm going to say it. It was a tradition, but it was not always a tradition. 100% means there were always couples who did things differently. Even if you go to the 1950s, which shows that typical time period in the U.S. where men were the provider and women were the family makers, so to speak, right? And the male role in that was to kind of, as a family maker, bring home the bacon, as they said, right?
Yeah.
So that has been shifting. And what I find is that, to your point, I have had clients who, like the man says, we came into this relationship, our arrangement was both of us will work, and then we will be this whatever percentage family. And when one of them changes, like the wife started to say, no, she wants, and this can happen, right? Our ideas of how we want to be changes when babies come along. Her idea was she was going to stay home and be the primary caregiver. And he was like, no, I want to be, just like Marlon's story, I want to be with my family.
Yes.
And it really led them close to the path of divorce, because even though the woman was progressive in her worldview of seeing that he wanted it, she was still tied into that he needed to do the work, and she wanted to be there because now that was her calling. And that's a really hard one, right? Because so I'll leave it at that. It's that's where the therapy comes in.
Yeah.
Because it has lots of stories in there. But it can be both men and women.
Yeah. And again, there's so many of these that we could look at in more detail, and if we have time at the end of the call, we can talk about them in more detail. But I think one of the things that we've seen in 20 years, when it comes to professional careers in particular, because I think actually working class families were thinking about these issues way before professional families, and couldn't afford to have just one person work, et cetera, et cetera. But in professional careers, because of some norms at the workplace around expectations around careers, back to that slide I put up around where people get stuck, there's this assumption that we, if we do any changes like what Marlon and Stephanie have done, we'll kiss our careers goodbye. I hope we're breaking that down. I hope people will download the Third Path Leader Guide and see, no, please, not only can you become someone who can move ahead in your career, when you read that Third Path Leader Guide, what you're going to see is you're going to become the leader of the future who helps people better manage, for example, when there's a pandemic. So do you see that as an issue in with couples too, is that they're worried about their careers? And any thoughts about that one?
Absolutely. I wanted to just piggyback to the point on only moms can flex their work. That one is really coming from workplace. It is reinforced from workplace in the way women get paid. The idea that a woman can take a lesser salary than a man is not only because there is not gender parity, but it's this idea that the man needs to provide for his family, and a woman has a man who can support her, so she can get less paid. So as leaders, whoever you are, men or women, have to check for this really, this is a story that we've all subscribed to at workplace, and now we don't even know where that story comes from, and we have it shows up as gender inequality at work in terms of salaries, right?
Yes.
But it's
Yes.
this idea of ultimately women can flex. And
Yes.
so it's happening in the pandemic in the same way. Women are the ones who are dropping out of the workforce right now.
Yes, yes, in a very scary way, except for, and again, I'm not pretending this is easy, for those of you who are listening in today and it feels like a stretch to imagine getting on the same page with your partner and you've had some struggles getting there, I know this might be hard, but the truth is what we're seeing as the pandemic continues is that couples who could both think flexibly before the pandemic, they're able to get through the pandemic together, and both continue to work, both flex around the needs of their family. So the skill set that couples can learn around flexibility will help them, whether that's a pandemic or some other life challenge that comes their way. When couples can both learn how to flex, it creates a much more sustainable solution. And what's amazing, it also is a solution where you learn some amazing skills. And again, we're kind of getting closer to the end of our time. There's never enough time. But one of the things that, if we do have time, Marlon might talk about is that it's not that he became a worse worker working in a flexible way. He actually probably got very good at some of the skills that are listed here around thinking ahead and planning and prioritizing and all these things that helped him better manage both his work and life responsibilities. So there's lots more we could say. Sally, how there might be one more point you want to make about encouraging people to be curious, look for that relational space. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, and I would love to hear from you, Marlon, because before flex comes, what's your relationship to uncertainty? And the pandemic is really making us examine that, because the whole idea of, and I don't know, Marlon, if you face this or not, but we often think if we schedule and prioritize, then we got uncertainty under control. So it's a relationship between control and uncertainty that you give rise to what I call play, that back and forth that you were talking about, right? It's not moving towards consensus and flex. These are results that come out of our relationship to how do you hold uncertainty and how do you do play. And for me, play is not watching football. It can be, but it is the back and forth, the co-creative experimentation that the couple does back and forth with each other and what they learn through that process of life and living in creating their life together, the integrated life, and the world around them. So that piece is what I mean by play. And to do that, you need curiosity. You need to kind of let go of judgment, which is a story, and say, hey, honey, how have you been thinking? What's going on for you with the pandemic? I see what you're doing, or I don't see what you're doing, but I'm just curious. Tell me where is this hitting you? Just asking that question can be really sometimes anxiety provoking, because you may be, you have to get ready to hear what's unspeakable, sometimes unhearable. So that preparation to uncertainty, that relationship itself is a thing. But that's what I mean by curiosity. Curiosity is not just about how do we do a chore or a task. Curiosity is, how is this hitting you in your underbelly? And how do I connect with that as you and I learn to link into that? And then, so there are so many steps, like you said, there's not enough time here, but there's a lot in the book. They can check out the book. They can connect on. I mean, this is the work, not just for a therapist. This is the work of coupling, which is how do we connect to each other's uncertainty and hold it with curiosity.
Yeah, and create an us that is kind of more creative than each individual apart, and you get to that us with all of these things. So wonderful. Again, more to talk about, but I think you gave us literally a good picture to visualize this concept and think about these ideas. That's going to really help us and help couples as they go ahead and move forward with their getting on the same page goals. All right. So again, if you want some very concrete examples of professionals who've put these ideas into action, lots of stories, lots of exercises, please download this free resource. We're making it available all month long. And I think it will really help you. We think it's something that you could share with your partner and say, hey, honey, this looks exciting to me. Does it look exciting to you? What do you like about it? It could really help guide your conversation. All right, we're at that wonderful place where we get to ask some questions of our speakers today. Again, there's lots of different ways we could take it. You might be thinking about, wanting to hear more about Marlon and how does a father go ahead and make some of these changes, or maybe you're part of a couple who's trying to think about a next step you'd like to make a change around, or a question for Saliha. All you have to do is write your question into the chat, and then Sergio is going to actually read it out loud. Sometimes it takes a couple minutes for us to get a question, so I have a couple things we'll be talking about if we need a little bit of time. Sometimes we have questions right away. Sergio, do we happen to have any questions right off the top?
Yes, we do have one question. The question says, do you have any advice for the people who are having their first thoughts about switching to remote work?
Mm-hmm. Oh, good. How to get remote work started. Marlon, I think you probably have some hands-on experience with that.
Yeah, first thing I would say, just be open-minded. Don't feel like you have to stick to the same career that you've been in, because through remote, there's just so many different avenues that you can go. And the first thing that I would do is start identifying all the different remote work boards that only list out remote opportunities, and they've existed for a while. One of the most popular ones is flexjobs.com, and that one has a paid membership, but there's also other websites like weworkremotely.com, which are free, that will give you listings of only remote opportunities. And many times you may find something in there, may not be in your field, but in a company that may have your field, and it allows you to grow there as well.
Yeah, wonderful. And Marlon, maybe an add-on to that is, many people are suddenly working remotely, and I've heard from a number of dads who say, I really like seeing my kids during the week. I'd like this to continue after the pandemic. Any advice for the case a parent can make or an employee can make about how to keep on doing some or fully remote work after the pandemic? Any ideas there?
Yeah, one thing that would be great is if everyone starts quantifying their results. If you can put your results into numbers and show the impact that you're having into the organization, even though you're working remote, I think you can show that and prove that you are valuable regardless of the structure that you're in. So I would highly recommend to find a way to quantify the impact.
Yeah. And, for those, again, who are listening in, we have a free resource on our website that is about remote work and has a questionnaire at the end, which is exactly what Marlon's talking about. It gives you some ideas of ways you can kind of be able to describe why working remotely is working so well for you, and to whether it's a quantify or qualify, to be able to share some stories because of the type of work you do. You can start building some examples, concrete examples about why this is a really good business decision to keep on working remotely. Wonderful. There might be another great question. Please.
Sorry, if I could add to that, if there are leaders listening in, I would say do an appreciative inquiry. Take on, don't put it just on the shoulders of your employee to figure out that they should make a case. Get curious and say, how is it working? What's not working? And it's not about proving themselves, but creating a culture of appreciating what's new and emergent and how we might grow it in the best interest of the employee and the company.
Thank you for adding that, because absolutely, and we have quite a few months ahead of us, so leaders, you can actually start getting that data today and getting prepared way before we are deciding what we're going to do next. And you will hear from your employees that there probably are some ways that they really have improved their approach to work. Lots of good stories out there around that. Thank you for that excellent suggestion. Wonderful.
Sure.
Sergio, there might be another question out there?
No more questions.
Okay, well, that is good because we're almost out of time. So I knew that this was going to be like all of our webinars, just go by way too quickly. You will be able to join us again next month when we're looking at this concept of overwork and how to stop overwork. And, in general, don't forget we are a nonprofit out there trying to change the world. We've got lots of good programming for you. There might be a last thought or word you wanted to say, Marlon, and then I'll ask Saliha if she has some last word or thought she wants to say.
Yeah,
Marlon, go ahead.
Sorry. So I think the key thing for me when I was listening to this, really holding uncertainty and listening with curiosity with your partner. I think now at the stage that we're in with this pandemic, there's a lot of anxieties, a lot of unknowns, a lot of things that we still don't know the answer to. And a lot of those things are right here at home for us. And I think that was just so key and integral, because just having the opportunity to listen and finding out solutions that work for you for the situation that we're in, I think really go a long way. So I loved hearing that, Saliha, and I think that's something that I'll be keeping in mind.
You're doing it. You're a natural at it. And what I would say as my closing thought is just imagine Marlon with Stephanie. Anytime you stop, imagine how they might be doing it, because what we are as couples is not a private affair. It's actually what we learn from everybody around us. So thank you for sharing your story, Marlon, because what you offered us is the importance of that conversation and that back and forth, and to not focus on these things as tools, but to think about it as practice.
Yeah. Wonderful. Another wonderful insight, Saliha, because it work and life keep on changing. So it is something that you are going to keep on needing to think about in a creative and curious way. Wonderful. So again, anybody who's listening in today, thank you so much, both of you, for speaking and sharing your wonderful thoughts. And please encourage your friends or colleagues to look up this recording on our website or on YouTube. And, don't forget to follow us on social media, where we're going to keep you up to date on the most exciting activities that are happening around the Third Path community. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. It was really wonderful.